The giant rancher standing on porch steps, one hand gesturing calmly while speaking. Confident, protective posture, wearing work shirt and jeans.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
The dust kicked up behind Margaret's wagon as she raced down the dirt road toward the Thompson ranch. Her hands trembled on the reins, and tears blurred her vision. She had nowhere else to turn. Every lawman in 3 counties either worked for the Bardwell family or feared them too much to help. Her mother had only 3 days before they came to take the land, and Margaret knew these men didn't make empty threats. The Thompson ranch appeared on the horizon like an answer to prayer. Margaret had only met Samuel Thompson once, 6 months ago at the county fair. He'd helped her lift a heavy crate of preserves onto her wagon, and she'd been struck by 2 things: his extraordinary height that made him tower over every man present, and the gentle kindness in his dark eyes that contradicted his imposing size. As her wagon clattered into the ranch yard, a figure emerged from the barn. Samuel Thompson stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, wiping his hands on a cloth. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding. He had to be nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. Margaret pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down before the wagon fully settled. Her legs nearly gave out, and Samuel crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides. "Miss Margaret?" His voice was deep but concerned. "What's wrong?" The dam broke. 6 weeks of fear and exhaustion poured out in ragged sobs. "They're coming for my mom. I don't know what else to do. Please, I need help." Samuel guided her gently to the porch, his massive hand barely touching her elbow, treating her like something precious and fragile. "Sit down, catch your breath. Tell me everything." Margaret sat on the wooden bench and Samuel lowered himself beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Up close, she could see the kindness in his weathered face, the concern creasing his brow. "My father passed 2 months ago," she began, her voice shaking. "He owned our land free and clear, 40 acres with a good water source. The Bardwell family has been trying to buy it for years, but Papa always refused. Now that he's gone, they've been pressuring my mother. She's not well, Mr. Thompson. The grief has taken so much from her." Samuel listened without interrupting, his full attention on her words. "Last week, 3 men from the Bardwell ranch came to our house. They said my father had debts, that he'd borrowed money from old man Bardwell 5 years ago. They had papers, documents with my father's signature." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap, but my father would never borrow from that family. He despised them. I know those papers are forgeries, but they have the sheriff in their pocket. "What do they want?" Samuel asked quietly. "The land. They say if we don't sign it over by Saturday, they're coming to remove us by force. They said they'd put my mother in the county poorhouse." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Mr. Thompson, my mother wouldn't survive that. She's already so fragile. I've been to every lawyer, every official. No one will stand against the Bardwells." Samuel was silent for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of absolute certainty. "They won't touch your mother." Margaret looked up at him, hardly daring to hope. "You'll help us." "I'm going to do more than help." Samuel turned to face her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "I'm going to make sure the Bardwells never bother your family again." Over the next 2 days, Samuel Thompson proved to be a man of action and surprising depth. He arrived at Margaret's small ranch the next morning, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. He spent the day reinforcing the fence posts and repairing the barn door. But more than that, he spent time with Margaret's mother, Elizabeth. Margaret watched from the kitchen window as Samuel sat with her mother on the porch, listening to her stories about her late husband with patience and genuine interest. He made the elderly woman laugh for the first time in months, and Margaret felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. That evening, as they shared a simple supper, Elizabeth excused herself to rest. Samuel helped Margaret clear the dishes, looking almost comical trying to fit his large frame into the small kitchen. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," Samuel said, carefully drying a plate. "I can see where you get your strength." Margaret paused, her hands in the wash basin. "I don't feel very strong right now. It's continuing on despite it. You've been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect your mother, refusing to give up your father's legacy. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." Their eyes met, and Margaret felt her breath catch. How had she never noticed how kind his eyes were? How safe she felt in his presence. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly. "You barely know us." Samuel set down the dish and turned to face her fully. "I've been alone on that ranch for 8 years. After my parents passed, I threw myself into work. Kept to myself. People in town, they see my size and they make assumptions. They think I'm simple, or dangerous, or both." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But 6 months ago at the county fair, you looked at me and smiled like I was just a regular man. You said thank you with such genuine warmth. That small kindness stayed with me. Samuel, I'm not telling you this to make you uncomfortable," he continued quickly. "I'm telling you because when someone is kind to me, I remember it. And when that person needs help, there's nothing in this world that would stop me from providing it." Before Margaret could respond, Samuel cleared his throat and changed the subject. "I've been thinking about Saturday. I have a plan, but I need you to trust me." Saturday arrived with a cloudless sky that seemed to mock the tension in the air. Margaret woke before dawn to find Samuel already there, sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee prepared. He'd clearly been there for hours, standing watch. "Did you sleep at all?" Margaret asked, accepting the cup he offered. "Enough." He smiled, and she noticed for the first time how it transformed his entire face. "How's your mother?" "Still sleeping. I haven't told her what might happen today," Samuel said with such conviction that Margaret almost believed him. At 10 o'clock, just as the Bardwell men had promised, 3 riders appeared on the road. Margaret recognized them: Frank Bardwell, the old man's eldest son, and 2 ranch hands known for their cruel methods. Samuel stood from his chair, and Margaret was reminded again of his extraordinary size. Standing at his full height, he seemed impossibly tall and broad. "Stay with your mother," he said gently to Margaret. "Let me handle this." The 3 men rode into the yard with the casual arrogance of those accustomed to getting their way. When they saw Samuel standing on the porch, their horses actually stopped, reacting to their rider's sudden uncertainty. Frank Bardwell recovered first, dismounting with forced bravado. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Samuel Thompson. I own the ranch to the east." Samuel's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "This doesn't concern you, Thompson. We have business with the widow and her daughter." "That's where you're wrong." Samuel descended the porch steps, and the 2 ranch hands' horses backed up nervously. "Any business you have with this family goes through me now." Frank laughed, though it sounded hollow. "And what makes you think you have any say in legal matters?" "Because Margaret Sullivan is my fiancée," Samuel said clearly, "and Elizabeth Sullivan is my future mother-in-law. This land, by extension, falls under my protection." Margaret's gasp from the doorway was drowned out by Frank's sputter of protest. "Fiancé, that's convenient timing. We've been courting quietly for months," Samuel continued smoothly. "We plan to announce it at the church social next month, but circumstances have accelerated our timeline. The wedding will be next week. Pastor Morris is already aware." Margaret's mind reeled. What was Samuel doing? Frank's face reddened. "You expect me to believe this fairy tale? You can't just—" "Can't what?" Samuel's voice remained calm, but he took a single step forward. His sheer size made all 3 men tense. "Can't marry a woman I care for? Can't protect my future family? Or are you suggesting that your forged documents should somehow prevent a legal marriage?" The word "forged" hung in the air like a challenge. "Those documents are legitimate. Frank blustered. Then you won't mind when I take them to the federal marshal in Denver for authentication, Samuel replied. I've already sent a telegram requesting an investigation into document fraud in this county. Given the marshal's reputation for dealing with land theft operations, I expect he'll be very interested in examining your PERS. This was clearly news that shook Frank. You had no right. I have every right to protect my family from fraud. Samuel's voice hardened slightly. Now, I'm going to give you one chance to leave this property peacefully. You're going to ride back to your father and tell him that this land is no longer available. The Sullivans are under my protection now, and any further harassment will be dealt with through proper legal channels, not through intimidation and forged documents. One of the ranch hands muttered something to Frank, clearly wanting to leave. Even from the porch, Margaret could see the calculation in Frank Bardwell's eyes. He was weighing his options, measuring Samuel's size, considering the mention of a federal marshal. My father won't take kindly to this interference, Frank said finally. Your father is welcome to take up his concerns with me directly, Samuel replied. I'll be here. The unspoken message was clear. Samuel Thompson was not a widow, and her daughter who could be bullied. He was a force to be reckoned with, and the Bardwells would have a real fight on their hands if they persisted. Frank remounted his horse with as much dignity as he could muster. This isn't over. Yes, Samuel said quietly. It is. The three men rode away, and Margaret watched until they disappeared from view. Only then did Samuel's shoulders relax slightly. He turned back to the house to find both Margaret and her mother standing in the doorway, Elizabeth leaning on her daughter for support. Young man, Elizabeth said with surprising strength in her voice, did you just announce your engagement to my daughter? Samuel climbed the steps slowly, suddenly looking uncertain for the first time. Mrs. Sullivan, Miss Margaret, I apologize for the presumption. It was the only legal protection I could think of that would give me standing to intervene. I'd into town immediately and explained to Pastor Morris that it was a bluff. Your reputations won't be harmed. I'll make it clear that I overstepped, that you had no knowledge of. Samuel Thompson, Elizabeth interrupted. Do you have feelings for my daughter? For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. Yes, ma'am, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I do. Margaret's heart thundered in her chest. Samuel, you don't have to. I've thought about you every day since the county fair, he continued, speaking directly to Margaret now. I told myself I had no right to pursue you. What would a beautiful, kind, educated woman want with a man like me? But then you came to me asking for help, and I realized I'd do anything to keep you safe. Anything to see you smile again. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or grief. Elizabeth patted her daughter's hand. I'm going to go rest inside. I trust you two can work out the details. She paused beside Samuel. My husband was a good man, Mr. Thompson, but he was stubborn and proud. He wouldn't ask for help even when we needed it. You're the kind of man who helps before being asked. I'd be honored to call you family. After Elizabeth went inside, Margaret and Samuel stood on the porch, the weight of the moment settling around them. I meant what I said. Samuel spoke first. If you want me to explain that it was all a strategy, I will. I won't trap you into anything. Margaret stepped closer to him. Even standing on the porch, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What if I don't want you to take it back? Hope flickered across Samuel's face. Margaret, I've felt alone since my father died, she said softly. Alone and scared and overwhelmed. But these past 2 days, with E out here, I've felt something I didn't think I'd ever feel again. I felt safe, protected. But more than that, she gathered her courage. I've felt seen. You look at me like I'm strong and capable, but you also seem to understand when I need support. Samuel's large hand rose slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away. When she didn't, he gently cupped her cheek, his touch impossibly tender for such a large man. You are strong and capable. But everyone needs someone to lean on sometimes. Is that what you want to be? Margaret asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Someone I can lean on. I want to be your partner, Samuel said. Your friend, your protector when you need one, and your biggest supporter always. I want to help your mother heal and honor your father's memory by caring for this land. I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to see your smile. He paused, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. If you'll have me. Margaret rose on her tiptoes, and Samuel bent down, meeting her halfway. Their kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and new beginnings. When they parted, both were smiling. I guess we should actually talk to Pastor Morris about a wedding, Margaret said with a watery laugh. Only if you're sure, Samuel insisted. We can take our time, do this properly. Samuel Thompson, you just faced down 3 men to protect my family, announced to the world that you want to marry me, and kissed me on my own porch. I think we're past taking things slow. His booming laugh filled the air, startling a crow from a nearby tree. I suppose we are. The next week was a flurry of activity. Pastor Morris, when informed of the situation, heartily approved. The federal marshal did indeed arrive to investigate the documents, and his presence alone was enough to make the Bardwells withdraw their claim entirely. It turned out Samuel, telegram had reached a marshal who'd been looking for an excuse to investigate corruption in their county. The wedding was small but perfect. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Samuel looked handsome in a new suit that had to be specially ordered from Denver. Elizabeth cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. As they stood before the congregation, Samuel's massive hand completely engulfed Margaret's smaller one. When Pastor Morris pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was gentle and reverent, drawing warm laughter and applause from the gathered friends and neighbors. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Samuel and Margaret stood on the porch of what was now their shared home. Elizabeth had already retired to her room, which Samuel had expanded and renovated to make more comfortable for her. Are you happy? Samuel asked, his arm around Margaret's shoulders. She leaned into his solid presence, marveling at how quickly her life had transformed. A week ago, she'd been terrified and alone. Now she stood beside a man who'd proven his devotion in the most extraordinary way. I'm more than happy, she replied. I'm home. Samuel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I could never regret it, Margaret said firmly. You know what my father used to say. He said that a person's true character shows in how they treat those who can't benefit them. You helped us when we had nothing to offer you in return. That's where you're wrong, Samuel said softly. You offered me everything I never knew I needed. A family, a purpose, a reason to be more than just the giant who lives alone on the hill. Margaret turned in his arms, looking up at this extraordinary man who'd become her husband. You were always more than that. I just feel blessed that I get to see all who you are. As the stars emerged overhead and the crickets began their evening song, Samuel and Margaret stood together, 2 souls who'd found each other in the midst of crisis and discovered something far more valuable than safety or protection. They'd found love, partnership, and the kind of bond that would weather any storm. The Bardwells never troubled them again. Samuel's reputation for fierce protection of his family spread throughout the territory, but those who knew him personally spoke more often of his kindness, his gentle nature, and the way he looked at his wife like she hung the moon. Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Margaret would smile and say that their father was the answer to a desperate prayer. Samuel would add that their mother was the blessing he never dared ask for. And Elizabeth, in her wisdom, would tell the grandchildren gathered around her that sometimes the biggest miracles come in the largest packages, and true love is always worth fighting for. The end.